Hey, what's up? Is this thing on? All right, today we're talking about evolution. We're going to go through natural selection, sexual selection, artificial selection, and maybe we'll get into some random changes to the gene pool as well. And we're going to primarily be talking about this in terms of humans. So, humans. Humans have beards, eyebrows, mustaches, eyelashes, head hair, and our hair keeps growing on our head a lot more than any other mammal, okay? Now, why does this happen? Why are we standing on 2 feet? Why do we have the biggest butts of the animal kingdom? All these things can be explained in terms of evolution. Most of it's natural selection, some of it's sexual selection, okay? So the key components of natural selection that we need to understand are that we have random mutations that are occurring from DNA replication mistakes before we do meiosis in our gonads to make gametes. When you are making the gametes, sperm and egg, they're both haploid. They have half a set of DNA. When you are making them, you have to do splitting processes called meiosis. And before that, you have to replicate your DNA. As you know, anytime you're copying something, you could make a mistake, especially if you're making copies hundreds of thousands of times for all the eggs and sperm of every human being in the history of ever. When you are going through this process of making these copies, DNA polymerase can make mistakes, and those are called mutations. Now, when you're switching out A's and T's and C's and G's, those are random, okay? It's not like the mistakes are intentionally trying to give humans a new, blood type or hair color or, extra fingers or longer nails or better eyesight or, different color. It's like, no, these are all random. This is just A's, T's, C's, and G's. But when you change the A's, T's, C's, and G's in the DNA, what that does is it gives you genetic variety. And gene is the instructions to make a protein. Now, if you have different instructions to make different proteins, that's how we get different color hair, different texture hair, different color eyes, whether you have a beard or not, whether it develops later in life or earlier in life. This is all based on your genes. So when you get these mutations, it contributes to genetic variety. And then depending on the environment that you live in, whether there is a cold environment, a hot environment, a sunny environment, whether you have this predator or that predator or this type of food, this diet, this nutrition, whatever, you have a selection of those traits as advantageous or not. If they're advantageous, they're called adaptations. This allows you to get food more readily. This allows you to survive, avoid predators, to catch prey, to smell food, to defend yourself with poisonous flying thorns, horns, claws, whatever. If you can stay alive long enough and then reproduce, convince someone to reproduce with you, or have the extra energy to go through reproduction, help raise your young. In the case of mammals and a lot of animals, they actually have to put in energy after the child is born. Then we are surviving with the fittest genes. Survival of the fittest is not necessarily an individual making it very long, but it is particularly their genes being able to be passed on. If you can have successful grandkids, like healthy, successful grandkids, then you know you are contributing to the gene pool. This is all the concept of natural selection. We got to have a struggle for existence because life is tough. The struggle is real. We know that not all organisms are going to survive. Not all babies are going to survive. Not everybody gets to have as many resources as they want. This is what's been true of life since the beginning of time. Competition and stress and other things trying to eat you, and this is normal. Struggle for existence. Then you have heritable variation, aka genetic variety, inherited variety, which comes from something random, and then the environment pressures you, boom, you have adaptations and survival of the fittest genes, okay? Now, in the case of humans, hair. Why do we have hair on our head? Why does the hair continue to grow? I would propose that this is because of sunlight. Hair on top of your head when we are standing upright, this is the direct sun exposure, and we have a higher chance of getting cancer if you don't have protection there. So we've got it there. And we don't have it on our face. Why don't we have much hair on our face? Well, maybe because of sweat, because that keeps us cool. Maybe because it shows more expressions and you can see blushing and different things that are able to communicate expression, like your eyebrows, because the communication of expression is really important in our social cooperation within humans, okay? So hair on the head is for sunscreen. The reason hair is long, I think, is to protect from sun exposure on shoulders, because the shoulders in the back get extra protection that way, which also might be why some men still maintain some amount of hair on their shoulders, right? Chest hair, not quite sure necessarily on that. But facial hair, that's because the ladies like it. There's not really a natural selection benefit to having facial hair. I mean, think about it. What is really the benefit there? A little bit of sunscreen, but then why don't the ladies have it? Whenever you see men and women looking different, it's called sexual dimorphism. Two different morphologies, two different forms. And so we see this with peacocks. We see this with, anything with antlers, horns, or any bird with bright colors, or any bird that's doing a lot of singing and dancing. The males are trying to convince the females to mate with them. They're trying to display their best genes to the female. Now, does the male know what they're doing when they're growing a beard? No. Does the peacock know what they're doing when they display their feathers? No. Does even the female peahen know what the peacock is doing? No. When the males are fighting and giraffes' necks are slamming against each other, they're displaying some sort of dominance, some sort of betterness, so they can have a greater opportunity to mate, but they don't really know what they're doing. They're not really saying, oh, well, I have the best genes and I need to show them off so that I can pass on my genes more and impress the female. And the female says, ooh, that's very nice. He must have really nice genes. And if I mate with him, then I'm going to have more successful young because he clearly has great genes. He's able to reproduce and make plenty of have tons of energy. He can find food. Even if you're a peacock and you've got this giant display of colorful feathers, the predators are ready to take you down. But if you've survived long enough to make your display in front of the female, that must mean that you're pretty good at still avoiding predators and still finding food, despite the fact that you've got this giant tail of feathers that you have to carry around. And the brighter the colors, the healthier you are, which means you're able to find food and find the right nutrition. This I'm explaining. This is all sexual selection. Okay, when the women really make the choice as to who they mate with and who they don't. Now, the peacocks, the giraffes, the lions that are fighting, anything that's competing, the females don't really know what they're doing. They just say, I like this and I don't like this. Okay, and they choose to mate with this more often. Now, they're not super cutthroat here. Most everybody gets to mate a certain amount, but it's just whether you get to mate a little bit more. And the males don't really know what they're doing either. They just slam their heads together and fight, and then they get to mate. They don't really conceptualize this. And if you think that this is silly, remember that humans don't really conceptualize this either, right? There's a lot of behaviors that you do. And are you thinking about passing on your genes to contribute to the gene pool because you've got the genes that are the fittest and the most adaptive in their environment? No, you just kind of have a preference. You say, I like this person. I don't like that person. I'm interested in this person. I'd like to hang out with this person. I mean, you don't conceptualize passing on your genes. But females have evolved to be choosy, to be picky. Because if a female is not picky, then she'll mate with anybody, and some of her babies will be healthy and successful with good genes, and others will not. So the males have evolved to be kind of show-offish, and the females have evolved to be kind of choosy and selective. And this is a good thing. So now we see in the gene pools, like those are the genes that we have. But that's not because nature chose that. Nature did not choose beards. Nature chose head hair, and nature chose eyelashes to keep stuff out of our eyes, and that's natural selection. But sexual selection chose beards, and that's why we see men with beards. Now, why do men bald? Okay, later on in their life. Well, if they have a full head of hair at the age of 20, age of 16, age of 25, 30, whatever, that's when they're reproducing. That's when the female is evaluating them for good genes. If their genetic inferiority or their poor genes doesn't show up until they're 50, 40, 60, whatever, then they're still going to be able to pass that on, which is where a lot of genetic diseases come from, is that like if you don't know that you have a genetic disposition for this type of cancer or this particular disease or whatever, you still might successfully get to reproductive age and pass on your genes, and you might be passing on some not so good genes just because, it doesn't show up until later. That's perfectly fine. So nature isn't necessarily selecting for that, but it is a part of it. Now, the other Oh, standing upright. Okay, so when we think about humans and why they stand upright and how we came to be where we are, we have to think about fire. We got to think about campfires. We got to think about running and how humans hunt. Okay, now humans evolved from organisms that spent most of their time in trees millions of years ago. Okay, the genus Homo is about 5 million years. So we have to think about 5 million years ago, or 6 or 7, somewhere around that time frame. Early humans, or early organisms that were the ancestors of humans, I should say, were spending more time outside of trees, right? Now, if they're opted for trees, then they've got long arms, long fingers, their legs are relatively short, their arms are really strong, and they've got tails because that is what's most optimal in the environment of living in a tree. But if the environment changes, or perhaps that environment gets a little crowded and some individuals are spending a little more time on the ground, well, then you start to see the mutations that are beneficial for walking around might be put into the gene pool a little bit more. Because walking around, if you are spending more time walking around, maybe you have access to different types of food rather than competing with everybody who's trying to get the food that's in the trees and in the forest. So if you spend more time kind of walking around, then and then your child or your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren or whatever start to get the mutations that allow them to more comfortably stand on 2 feet and have glutes, stronger glute, longer legs, shorter arms, less of a tail. All of these mutations are beneficial things if you're spending less time in the trees and more time walking around. Now, this takes hundreds of thousands of years and very, very slight tweaks. So we want to think about it. It's not just like one day every human who had a tail died, or every ancestor died who had a tail, because walking around with a tail is disadvantageous, and that everything that was born from this point forward had large glutes and longer legs and big calves that were able to. I mean, these things don't happen overnight. You have to kind of think about this slow, gradual transition and say, like, yeah, a monkey, an ape, an early human, they can walk around just fine with a tail, even if they don't have large glutes and large calves. But as you spend more time doing that, the more babies you have that end up with the mutations of larger calves, more upright posture, a curved spine. These are the things that allow you to be more comfortable walking around and spend more time outside of the trees and spend less time in the trees. And you're contributing more to the gene pool of like the genes that favor bipedalism, standing on 2 feet, right? And so over hundreds of thousands of years, we just see those genes are just filling more of the gene pool, and then human beings generally accumulate those types of things. Okay, now at some point, fire comes along, right? And if you are the human being that enjoys fire and likes being around wildfires and likes living or going to the places after a fire comes through, guess what? Your food got cooked, and you get in and you get more calories and more nutrients in an area that got baked by the fire. And if you spend that time there. Now, if you're afraid of the fire and you don't like going near the fire and you don't like eating that food, that's fine. You'll still get food, but you're getting less nutrients, less calories, and then less babies, and passing on less of those genes. If you are the human that's curious about spending more time with fire or fascinated with fire in some way, well, you're going to be around food that's cooked a little bit more. And then if you're the human that's curiously standing on 2 legs, the fascinating thing about standing on 2 legs is all of a sudden your arms are free, right? This is where tool use starts to come about. We can hold things, we can grasp things, and having opposable thumbs allows us to grab these things. So, our early ancestors did not have opposable thumbs, but then mutations makes that joint a little more loose, and then that allows us to grab things, and that's beneficial. If a random mutation is beneficial in the environment, it's going to stick. And so we're able to hold things. And then with a fascination with fire, maybe you try and move fire and you pick it up and you watch it, and maybe you feel better in that environment. I mean, you have to understand that early humans, a million years ago, 500,000 years ago, they don't really know that, like, hey, if I play with this fire and put it near my food and then eat the food afterwards, that I'm going to get more calories, and that's going to allow me to pass on my genes more successfully because I'm getting more energy and nutrients from my food. You don't know this, right? Even most of us nowadays, it's not like we're cooking our food because we know that that's going to lead to us being healthier and being able to pass on our genes. No, it's like it tastes good, or that's just like what we do in our culture, right? And so we kind of accidentally stumble into these kinds of things, and it's because of the genes that we have. So you have to think about the genes that we have kind of give us an advantage, whether that's behavioral or structural, whether we are fixated on certain things, changes in our bone structure, muscles, digestion, and that results in changes. And if the changes are beneficial, they're going to stick around. So we spend more time standing up, fascination with fire, curious about fire, cooking our food more, and this gives the nutrients and calories, and then it starts to feed the brain, right? And once you start feeding the brain and you start cooking the food, you get more available calories, and then the brain can grow, because the brain is very energetically expensive, requires a lot of calories. And then once the brain starts to grow, then you start to get to understand the idea of fire, understand the idea of persistence hunting, to understand the idea of communication, cooperation, and socialization. And then it kind of snowballs, and all of a sudden here we are in 2022, being able to give lectures about this stuff over the internet and computers, right? So like these things absolutely just snowball out of effect. We got to see the little stages along the way. Now, I mentioned eyebrows before, and I mentioned socialization and coordination and community work. Humans are social organisms like bees. We work together, and the more you can communicate your emotions with someone else, the more you can prevent them from getting too angry at you, or from fighting you, from pushing you too far, because you communicate, no, that's wrong, I didn't like that, I'm angry, you should back off. And this is how we work together. We have to tell people, no, you went too far, that was not okay, or I like you, I appreciate you, or let's work together, or hey, let's go over here and hunt this thing over here, or ooh, I'm really excited, I'm really happy, spend more time with me. All of that communication is why we maintained eyebrows, as the rest of our face lost the hair, probably for sweat cooling. Not entirely sure there, but we kept the eyebrows because it's so important to be able to communicate your emotions. Same thing with dogs. Why do dogs, amongst all organisms, dogs are definitely the most expressive, and you really feel like they can read your emotions? Well, they've evolved to read your emotions. Dogs know this stuff because they've evolved with us for the last 10,000 years to read our emotions. So they kind of do have eyebrows, and they do have different colored eyebrows, and we like that, and we connect with them more. So we're going to particularly spend more time breeding and enjoying the dogs that have facial expressions that we can connect with as humans. And the dogs that are more in tune with our emotions, well, those are the ones that we're going to want to breed. That's called artificial selection. Now, in the initial, I guess you would call that natural selection, because the dogs that were the calmest and the most docile, friendly, and in tune with human emotions, they were the ones spending more time with humans, and humans allowed them to hang out, and then the dogs get free food after we're done eating our food and we've cooked it around the campfire and we're just chilling. The dogs, the early wolf comes up, and it's like the aggressive wolf. Well, we're going to chase that thing off. It's not going to get extra food. But the calm wolf can expend very little energy to just wait and be patient and get fed a free meal. And that extra calories allows that calm wolf to make babies, right? And the babies are going to be a range of calm to aggressive, and the most aggressive is going to be kicked out, and the calmest is going to be kept. And if you extend that generation after generation for 100, 200, 300, 400 years, right? For the last 10,000 years, we've always been picking the calmest wolves, the ones that are the most cooperative, the ones that are most communicative, the ones that are the cutest. And for the longest time, for most dogs, it was about the ones that were the most helpful. They help us hunt, they help us stay protected. We got bulldogs. We got fast dogs. We got dogs with great smell. We got dogs that burrow into, to grab rabbits, and then we pull them out by the tail. That's Chihuahuas, I mean, we have all these different dogs, we've bred them specifically. So before human beings were naturally just spending more time with the dogs that had like a calm disposition and benefited us by warning us from other wolves. But then it becomes, as soon as we understand what we are doing and we are actively breeding them and picking certain traits, then we call that artificial selection. This is what we do with apples and cherries and, bell peppers of a certain color and a certain size. And the reason we have, only orange carrots as opposed to all the different colors of carrots that really used to exist. And, we have broccoli and cauliflower, cabbage, kale, and kohlrabi all coming from the same basic little weed that just, is arugula. And these are all things that humans have chose in artificial selection. These are non-random things. And then the last thing, we really just have to make sure that I address the hunting, right? Human beings with our giant heels and our giant calves and glutes, these are all very rare things that evolve with bipedalism, standing upright and being able to hunt. Persistence hunting in Africa, which is to not run faster, but run longer than anything with four legs. Something with four legs, when they run, they can only breathe when they are reaching, and then they exhale on the contraction. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Think of a cheetah running, They are this accordion. It's like they reach and then they push, and they reach and they push. Think of a horse, okay? They can only breathe once every time. But us, while we're running, we don't have to expand and contract our rib cage. So we could just keep breathing and we could just keep going. And this is why we also evolved to lose a lot of our hair, is because, and sweating, which is a relatively rare thing in the animal kingdom, especially the mammalian family, is that this sweat allows us to cool ourselves on the go, and we can breathe at any rate that we want and get plenty of breath, and we can just keep going. So that antelope that is much faster than us, they can outrun us, but if we keep going for 9 hours, if we keep going for 9 miles, that's the average distance that is hypothesized that humans ran every day. Go for 9 miles, it's like eventually that thing's going to get exhausted and it's going to pass out. It has to stop running so it can catch its breath, and then it goes and running again. And because of the contraction of the rib cage in 4, it's like, this is why human beings can beat horses on 50-mile races, because we have the adaptations to be endurance athletes. We have the glutes stabilize our torso and prevent us from flopping around too much. And the calves are this giant thing that allows us to run on the balls of our feet. And the heel is what the calf attaches to. So it's this strong lever so that you can just propel yourself forward for not very fast, but for a very long time. Because human beings, not fast, not particularly strong, but incredibly smart, and had the endurance adaptations for our environment. And so once you're able to catch more food and then you understand the cooking of food, then it's just like you're just feeding more calories to the brain and allowing for, again, the snowball effect of human evolution to really take off there. Now we're at the point where we have managed fire so much that it's turned on the lights and created this computer and allowed it to work, and we have electricity because we've managed fire there, so we cook food and all that stuff. And now we can artificially select a lot of organisms. Every cow and house cat and dog and apple tree and everything is all just a result of artificial selection. Pretty insane. So hopefully that gives a pretty good understanding of different types of evolution, allows you to apply that to different organisms, be it a bear, a coyote, a lizard, a chicken, dinosaurs, like why anything has the particular adaptations that it does. Thanks.